apologize, I meant to send out these correlations, I correlated them, but I'll go through and, kind of show you, I'll go through a little more of what I highlighted, and, according to your page number, since mine's online. We stopped at page 92 last time, and we stopped with where we were talking about how thinking routines are similar to, other types of routines and how they're different. And if you remember, just to kind of recap right there on your page 92, we know that the routines have a few steps. They're very easy to learn and be remembered. They can be easily scaffolded. And they get used repetitively, which makes them part of the definition of routine. But the difference with a thinking routine is that they're useful across a variety of contexts, and they exist in both public and private practices. Now, what does it mean by public and private practices? Anyone give a thought to that when it said how a thinking routine is different because it is, as it said, exists in both public and private practices?
I think like what we were saying last time about use it at school as well as at home. So use it kind of like, it becomes a norm in your life, I think.
Or maybe even the public sharing with everyone in the classroom, private thinking to yourself.
Internal. It changes your mode of thinking.
Okay.
This may be more beautiful than I'm thinking about when my child starts to look at whatever skill you're working on, that as they've done it routines, they may start thinking about it more as how to approach it rather than what's the order or dynamic. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think we also need to think outside of the school building, because what we're doing is preparing them for life in general. So we're not only talking about just here. These are practices that they're going to utilize
Take with
every
the
day.
life. Exactly.
You know, I think we've started even hearing some of our parents even talk about, they're talking about these things at home, they're using the language and the verbiage, and so it's interesting, the parents, I mean, I've had some of them come, oh, what is that book you're reading? You know, so, and I think you've seen it, we've even seen it, I mean, I was in a lounge the other day and someone was talking about, you know, something that just came to mind with the child. And the connection it made, so I think we're on the right track there, so we can take it and use it.
I think I've had an opportunity, I think, outside of the classroom, because I'm a Sunday school teacher, and I use it a lot in my Sunday school class.
Right.
That's great.
So that's way inner city class, kids are learning that, so
And it
I feel good
works.
about it. Yes, it works.
Yes. And I think with Karen, who is in
Keystone Academy.
Keystone Academy, you know, she is really using this, and so it is, and it's interesting, because people will, I cannot tell you how many people will come up and say, but I didn't think public schools could use that. Why not?
Exactly.
Why not? Of course we can. So, yeah, it's, so I think that was important. If you go to, let's see, there's on page 93, let me back up, you're probably page 92, where it talks about how you can, one way to group thinking routines. It starts out with consequently. That's what I highlighted.
And it's on 93,
93,
I think.
sorry.
Bottom, down to bottom.
93.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. One way to group thinking routines is as the answers to certain key questions about learning that students bring with them to any new classroom. I thought that was really important, because as we talk about how we're building from kindergarten all the way through, and I think that was one of the questions someone brought out last time, what happens when they go from this one environment into an environment where they're not using it? So I think it's important that we are building this, because they will bring these routines to the new classroom. And it deals with the grouping of how the ideas are discussed and explored within the class, how our ideas, thinking, and learning managed and documented, and that's an area that I think we're all interested in now. How do we document this? How do we assess it? And as always, how do we grade it, okay? And, you know, because you're gonna, like someone said, I think it was Ms. Lansky, this takes a lot of time. She was out there the other day and she said, I was really interested, I sat back and listened to discussions, but it took a lot of time, you know, and she's in a non-graded environment, so you know in your area, okay, you're gonna extend this time, it's worthwhile, but I also have gotta get something documented here.
And that might be something I do right now for next year, that I think each of us agree that we're finding more and more uses for rubrics in terms of what we're doing. And so that may be something that as grade levels, we need to sit down and develop rubrics for assessing these thinking routines in such a way that we're making sure we're tying it into the curriculum. And at the same time that we can really measure a student's understanding. I mean, yes, we'll still have the informal assessments that we do these routines and we don't necessarily put them in the grade book, but we'll also have times where it's appropriate to assess them. I know something that I do with my social studies, we do current events once a week, this 9 weeks. And I try to tie in a thinking routine where the children show me what they know about the article based on a thinking routine. And then there's a rubric to go with it. So that's something that we might want to develop going into next year as we're looking into how we can, you know, basically document these thinking routines and what they're doing for the kids.
I wonder if there's a way to do the rubric so that it can be made the same rubric, each week for each grade level.
Sure.
So that the expectations
reason
are kind of the
it can't be.
same going
Yeah.
through all 6 grades.
There's no reason it can't be, yeah.
Yeah, I would see that as a great spin-off from this, is developing assessment techniques for these that can be used across the grade levels. I think that would be really very appropriate, especially as we prepare next fall to hand this out to the parents or roll this out to them, is to give that explanation a little of what we're looking at and how we're gonna be grading. So, okay, the next part I was looking at, I think 96 for you. This was talking about, if you remember, Susan, and at the point in the year where she was talking about active questioning teaches students a simple routine about providing answers and explanation. Do you remember her, how she kind of evolved over that? She began to have a subtle shift in the daily edit. That's where she did her daily edit, which is kind of like what we see a lot of times at your beginning work. Bell work, the daily, what do you call yours?
Distributed practice of what's been taught.
Yeah, the morning work, and he has like a routine every morning, and there are certain things, I've seen first grade do that, it has a little math, a little this, whatever. And it talks about that shift. When she asks students for their edit, she begins to take a slight pause, allowing students to jump in and respond readily. So I thought it was interesting walking through with her how she guided and then started to kind of let go. And I have that conversation a lot of times, especially with new teachers. They want to not let go, you know, they want to model too much, or sometimes what I've called it with them is I've said you kind of front load. You want to give them everything so that they get it all right, you know? And I see that, especially with new teachers. They're so afraid to let them experience, you know, and sometimes fail. And a lot of times I'm sure that's because I'm in there and they're like, oh gosh, if they fail, I've failed, you know. And so we have to learn to kind of balance that and let go, and that's difficult. And it's also difficult for some seasoned teachers. So it was interesting watching that and going through that process. And it said there, let's examine it briefly through our criteria. And this was important when we start looking at some of your routines. And I thought this was a very important thing to look at, things that you do. Examine briefly your criteria.